There we go. All right, good afternoon, good Monday. Hope your week is getting off to a good start. We're going to do a Rashi in the second Aliyah today in Parshas Toldos. In the first Aliyah, we already see a repeat performance of what happened in the life of Avram. That seems to be the theme of the beginning of Yitzchak's life and the stories about him, that in many ways he's a replica of Avram Avinu. He looks like Avram Avinu. He has the experiences of Avram Avinu. He follows in the ways of Avram Avinu. So, Vayhi Ra'av Ba'aretz Milvad Harav Rishon Asher Hayabi Me Avraham. There was a famine. He had to leave the land. He goes to Gerar in the same way as Avram had to leave the land because of a famine. He goes to Mitzrayim. Then Avram goes to Gerar. So not only does he leave, but it says he leaves in the same way in this Rav, Asher Hayabi Me Avraham, the same way there was a Rav in the Me Avraham. The Torah gives that exact correlation, that exact connection between these repeat performances. And so he leaves the land, he goes to Gerar, he lies about his wife, exactly as Avram did. He gets in trouble with Avimelech, just as Avram did, all in the same way as repeating those patterns. But afterwards, he goes on to a very productive life in the area of Gerar, of course, fulfilling the promise of the bris, the covenant that Avimelech made with Avram. Avimelech saw and foresaw that Yitzchak, the descendant of Avram, would carry on his legacy and his family, and he wanted to have peaceful relations with him. And so they create a bris, they create a covenant. We see that now fulfilled. Yitzchak sort of hides in terms of who he is or who his wife is, but then once they sort things out, Yitzchak lives a productive life in Gerar, not only because in the aftermath of the incident, Abimelech allows him to live that life, but also because of the original fulfillment of the bris, of the original bris as well. And the pasuk which captures his success over here is Vayizra Yitzchak ba'aretz hahi, vayimtza b'shana hahi, mea sharim vayivarcheu Hashem. Yitzchak planted seeds in that land, and he found in that year 100 gates, and God blessed him. Seems to be a very repetitive pasuk. Vayizra Yitzchak ba'aretz hahi, vayimtza b'shana hahi. It could have just said Vayizra Yitzchak ba'aretz b'shana hahi vayitza me'asharim. Why does it say hahi, hahi? These sort of various layers to the pasuk. So Rashi explains here the layers of the pasuk and how it's supposed to convey to us a second layer of meaning in terms of what we're supposed to deduce about Yitzchak's success. So it's not only that Yitzchak was successful, but he was successful despite all the odds, despite all the counts against him. And those are layered into the pasuk now. So what does it mean, ba'aretz hahi, in this land? Ba'aretz hahi, alfa pisha, eina chashuva kishar eretz Yisrael. Even though this land is not as important as the rest of Israel, however you will understand that statement of Rashi, either it's not as agriculturally important, is not as fertile, or perhaps it's not as important in terms of the bracha of Hashem, of the territorial land of Israel. Maybe it's not totally part of the land of Israel. That's a interesting hashkafic and halachic discussion, maybe politicized discussion for another time. But maybe this land of Gerar, of Plishtim, maybe doesn't have the same status as the rest of Israel in terms of its promise of bracha. And yet, despite the inferior quality spiritually and physically of that land, even in that land, Vayizra, even in that land, he was able to root his seeds, he was able to plant, he was able to be successful. Not only that, but ba'aretz hahi, in that inferior land, b'shana hahi, ha'aretz kasha, ve'hashana kasha. Not only was the land difficult, the land inferior, but the year was inferior. It was a bad time. It was a time of drought. Afal pi she'ena ketikana, hayta shnat ra'avon. We know this was a bad time. The whole preface of the story is Vayhi Ra'av Ba'aretz. There was a famine in the land. Maybe there was a drought in the land, which led to this famine. Now, granted, it may have been better in Gerar, which is why he goes to Gerar, but you understand today that the difference between, any of the territory of Israel, Yerushalayim, Beersheba, anywhere in Yehudah, and where Gaza is today, is a stone's throw away. So it can't be that if Israel was affected by Ra'avon, by famine, and by drought, that Gerar wasn't affected in some similar way. It might have been better there, which is why he goes. They may have stored more food there. They may have had more resources, but it was still a land that was being affected by this time period. So this was Ba'aretz hahi, an inferior land, and a shana hahi, a bad year in terms of produce and growth, and still, not only Vayizra Yitzchak, that he was able to get the seeds to take root and to grow something, but that growth yields mea sharim. It grows 100-fold. What does 100-fold mean? Mea sharim she'amdua kama ru'uya lasos. It means that people evaluate land for how much it is supposed to produce. Ve'asat al echad she'amduha mea. And for every one that it was expected to produce, it produced 100. That's what 100-fold means. There's certain expectations for a land. And the Mefarshim on Rashi explain here that, Rashi even himself says it, for Rabbeinu Amru, Omed Zelamaisraf Haya. You say to yourself, well, why were people evaluating land? Oh, they might have just evaluated it, or for purposes of maestros, of tithes, person needs to know how much the land is going to yield, how much to prepare for, etc. So for whatever reason, they estimated how much this land would be able to yield, and for every estimation of one, it yielded 100. So all the layers of this puzzle come together to tell a story that not only was Yitzchak successful, but he was incredibly successful. He was successful beyond people's wildest imagination. And thirdly, he was successful despite all the counts against him, all the odds against him. And that speaks to the miraculous nature and the blessed nature of his endeavor, which is why the pasuk ends, Vayivarchehu Hashem. All these pieces are connected. The Vayizra, despite the Aretz, despite the Shana, which yields Mea Sharim, which can only be explained by Vayivarchehu Hashem, the bracha of Hashem. It was so clear in that case. We always believe that our produce, our productivity, our sustenance, and our parnasa is always biyad Hashem. It's always in the hands of Hashem. It's always because of the brachos of Hashem. But we don't always see it as directly and clearly as it was in this case, perhaps, which can be held up as a paradigm for us to think about other cases as well. Thank you so much. Have a great day, a blessed day. Blessed.